Meeting is being recorded. Fantastic. So again, for those of you who have just joined us, welcome. I'm Gigi Naglak, the Director of Programs at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. It's great to see you all today. And I look forward to talking with all of you about our COVID-19 response grants. So our plan for today is to go over some background information about the grants, especially dig into our two types of grants because they are different in important ways. Talk a little bit about some of the eligible and by extension ineligible expenses that can be incorporated in these grants. Go through a little bit about the process of applying, review our important dates, and then open this up for questions. I should mention also one more time that my colleague Angel Dye is going to be keeping an eye on our chat throughout the program. So if you have a question, please don't hesitate to put it into the chat, and we will either get to it immediately or get to it very soon. The only reason that I might put off a question would be if I know we're going to cover it in a moment or two. So don't hesitate to put your questions into the chat, and we'll have time for a longer Q&A as we get to the end of the project. So, or of the presentation, excuse me. So these funds, the COVID-19 response grants, come from the American Rescue Plan Act. This was that big law that was approved by the United States Congress and signed into law by President Biden back in March of 2021. It is huge. It's $1.9 trillion. Of that funding, the National Endowment for the Humanities received $135 million in supplemental funding, 40% of which was specifically designated in the legislation for the state humanities councils. New Jersey is one of 56 state and jurisdictional humanities councils. It includes all the states in the United States, as well as territories. Of this means that New Jersey is receiving, it occurs to me that when I did this presentation before, it was we will receive. Now I can actually say New Jersey has received just under $1.2 million. And the majority of that funding is going directly to our regrants program, to the COVID-19 grant program. And this funding is to support organizations that do humanities work. That's a little bit of the background here. We were thrilled to be able to reopen our COVID-19 response grant program, which was created last spring with the additional funding that came to us through the CARES Act. So this is very good news. Our COVID-19 response grants, yay. An important difference between, for those of you who may have applied for or received a grant last year through the CARES Act funding, one of the COVID-19 response grants, those grants were really emergency grants. They were meant to respond to the emergency nature of the situation that we were in last spring. Now, obviously, we are still in an emergency situation right now, and these grants can absolutely be used for that type of emergency need, those types of emergency needs. However, this year's grants actually have a slightly broader focus. We're looking not only at that emergency need, but also longer term relief efforts and recovery efforts. So this is really important. When you are thinking about what your grant program may be, what types of funds you want to support at your organization, it doesn't necessarily have to be the thing you need immediately right this second. This can also be forward thinking. How can you be better prepared to deal with these types of crises in the future? How can you shift some of your programming or what new needs have arisen from the situation that we've all been in for the last year and a half approximately, and what we can do to make you a stronger humanities program provider here in the state of New Jersey. That's really what we're thinking about with the American Rescue Plan Act. Foundational, of course, to all of the work we do here at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities is the humanities, and specifically the public humanities. So I want to take a moment to get into that a little bit. We have a lot more detail about this on our website and specifically within the grant guidelines. But broadly, the humanities help us explore our human histories, values, cultures, and beliefs. And when we think about the humanities, we sometimes think about humanities subjects, but also there are humanities practices, and both of these may be relevant to the kinds of work that you do. So when we talk about humanities subjects, humanities is a broad umbrella. The big ones, a lot of the ones that people think about include history, literature, philosophy. I often say that if the word studies is involved, chances are it's a humanities discipline. So whether that's gender studies or ethnic studies or American studies or European study, any type of studies, chances are that's a humanities discipline or has significant humanities content. There's a more exhaustive list available on our website, also on the website of the National Endowment for the Humanities. I mentioned also humanities practices. And when we think about humanities practices, we think about things like critical thinking, inquiry, dialogue, analysis. How can we get deeply into an understanding of all of these topics and both share and analyze how that affects our lives in the past, today, and the lives that we might create in the future. Critical to this is this beautiful word, public. We are focused very much on the public humanities. And when we talk about that, what we're thinking about is really broad access to the humanities. So not exclusively within the academy, whether the academy means exclusively, K through 12 education or college and post-secondary education. So we're interested in programs that take you out of classrooms and into the world. How can we bring the humanities out of classrooms and into the world? The humanities are, as I mentioned, a very large umbrella, and there's a lot of gray areas and overlap with other disciplines, but it is not completely open to all interpretation. There's a few areas that come up a lot as having overlap with, but not being exactly the same as the humanities. I'm going to briefly talk about them. The arts, the social sciences, and social services are main areas here. In the arts, we think about the portion of the arts that is related to the humanities as being the analytical portions. So for example, art history or theater criticism. These are disciplines of the humanities. Creation and performance of art does not fit in this. So one way of thinking about this might be, to create a painting of an historical figure would not be a humanities project. To look at paintings of an historical figure and how they are interpreted throughout history might be. That's just one example of many, many that I can get into. In the social sciences, we think a lot about, so this might include sociology, anthropology, psychology, and other social science disciplines. We think about the analytical rather than the numerical side. So gathering the data is less about humanities discipline than interpreting the data, understanding what this means for our society, and helping others to understand what it means. And in the social service sector, this is perhaps the area where there is definitely overlap, but the least amount of overlap. Most importantly about this, humanities disciplines are different from humanitarian efforts. While we see, of course, enormous value in humanitarian efforts, they do not fit under the sort of broad heading of the humanities. As an example, if there was, and we have seen this sort of come across, I have seen this come across my desk as well, if you have a food kitchen, a food pantry of some sort, buying the food for that food pantry would not be something that we would support. However, if for some reason your food pantry had a monthly book club, that might be something that we would support. Does that make sense? I recognize that nothing is ever sort of cut and dry in these kinds of, when we're looking at these different kinds of separations. So if you have specific questions about your program, it is one of the things that I really strongly recommend that you reach out to us about. This is also why we have included an LOI process, a letter of intent process in this, so that we can hopefully identify if there are specific questions that individuals have about types of humanities practices. So cool. Also, thank you, Britt, about that this is helpful in making this clearer. I'm so glad. That's excellent news. Okay. Continuing along. I've mentioned our COVID-19 response grant guidelines before. All of the guidelines are available at njhumanities.org/grants, and you'll find them under COVID-19. This is literally everything you need to know. And I really strongly recommend that you read everything. You can read it right there on the website. You can also download PDFs of the guidelines for each type of grant and also the application forms so that you can look at them in advance. I can't tell you how important it is to read through all of the information. I know it's long, but we've tried to really edit down to the absolutely necessary stuff. Today, by the way, I'm definitely not going to be reading every word of those grant guidelines for you. We're going to focus on some of the highlights. So again, even if you have listened to every word that I've said, make sure you go back and read through. So we have two types of grants: general operating support grants and also program support grants. I should mention, for those of you who are familiar with NJCH's project grants, our incubation and action grants, that these exist separately from those grants. And they are in fact, very different from those types of grants. These are not project grants. These are larger support grants for your organization and for specific programs that you run. So, two grant types. We're going to start with the general operating support grants. So the GOS grants range from $5,000 to $20,000. They're for organizations whose primary mission is in the public humanities. They require you to have a budget of greater than $50,000 and at least one full-time equivalent. So we're not saying you have to necessarily have one full-time staff, but your total number of staff have to add up to at least one full-time equivalent. We include an FTE calculator in the application information. However, just so you know where this comes from, it's worked out at a 40-hour week per year. So if you work a 40-hour week, that means you work 2,080 hours per year. You can divide those numbers together and come up with one FTE. So you basically add up the total number of hours that everybody works and divide by 40. And that's how you get your FTE. Your total number of FTEs. For this budget requirement that we have, this is the $50,000 budget. We are allowing you to calculate this budget in one of two ways. One, it can be your budget from your most recent financial statement. So whether that's your most recent audit, your most recent 990, your most recent treasurer's statement, any kind of official statement of your budget from your organization. And you can do the most recent one. And if that's $50,000 or higher, that's great. One of the things that we've found is that there are a lot of organizations whose budgets have been on a bit of a roller coaster for the last year and a half or so. So if it works out better for you and to average out your last 3 budgets, if that will allow you to cross this threshold, then you can absolutely do that as well. We recognize that especially in smaller nonprofits, budgets can be up and down depending on exactly what you're doing. So we want to make it as accessible as possible for as many people as possible. So some of the types of organizations that are eligible for GOS grants include museums, historical societies, heritage organizations, and then again, any other type of cultural or community nonprofit that has a humanities-focused mission. This is the type of grant that has more organizations that are not eligible in this particular type. Colleges and universities are not eligible. Neither are K through 12 education institutions. This is because while colleges and universities, as well as K through 12 educational institutions, definitely have humanities components, they are not exclusively. I really, really hope that everybody's elementary school is teaching math, for example, not a humanities discipline. Government departments are not eligible for this type of grant. Again, lots of different kinds of service in the government. Something that is different from last year is we included municipal libraries as being eligible for GOS grants last year. That is not the case this year. You can apply for the other kind of grant. Any type of organization that does not have a humanities mission, but does have humanities programs, cannot apply for a GOS grant, but are likely eligible for the program support grants that we'll get to in a moment. For-profit businesses are not eligible for any of our types of grants. Neither are foreign entities or individuals. So those are included for all the types of grants that we have. Very important, critically important right at this moment. If you are eligible to apply for GOS funding, you should apply for GOS funding. Even if you have a very specific program that you're going to focus it on and you're thinking, no, it would make more sense to apply for program funding. No, please apply for GOS funding. If we get an LOI from you and discover that you are eligible for GOS funding, but you've applied for a program support grant, we're going to switch you back over. So please apply for GOS funding. Your general operating support grant can support any type of programmatic expenses, but it is extremely flexible. So we want to put organizations that are eligible to apply for GOS, make sure they're in the GOS area. However, there are plenty of organizations that are not eligible for GOS, and they should consider a program support grant. These are a little bit more varied as far as the what can be applied to program support grants. $2,000 to $20,000. Again, the cap stays the same, but the bottom end lowers down. These are any types of organizations that do public humanities work, even if that is not your primary mission. For example, we have supported a lot of arts-based organizations where their primary mission is an arts focus, but they have humanities programs that are associated with with the organization. One example that I can think of off the top of my head is the wonderful George Street Playhouse in New Brunswick. They are a theater producing organization, but they have a number of humanities-based programs that we have supported over the last many years at various times. George Street Playhouse could apply for a program support grant for any of their humanities programs. They can be new or existing programs, doesn't matter. And for a lot of organizations that do not qualify for GOS funding, you would be eligible for a program support grant. Again, to give some examples here, since sometimes that's helpful to you, any humanities organization, if you are a humanities focused nonprofit but don't meet the GOS criteria, for example, if you don't have full-time staff, if you don't meet that $50,000 budget threshold, consider applying for a program support grant. Museums, libraries, and archives will often fit under this. For example, a science museum, like a science center may not have, or a zoo may not have does not have a humanities focus in their mission, but may have humanities programs within the organization. They could apply for a program support grant for those programs. Colleges and universities, K through 12 institutions, historical societies and heritage organizations with the smaller budgets or no full-time staff, government departments and agencies who do humanities work, and then any other type of organization that doesn't have a humanities mission but does humanities work. So I'm going to pause. Actually, no, I'm going to finish this up and then I'm going to pause for a moment to talk a little bit more about this.
We have a question in the chat, Gigi, just when you get a moment. I think it's about general operating support grants.
Absolutely. Hold on one second and I'm going to get right to that. Thank you so much, Angel. I appreciate it. So again, not eligible. For-profit businesses, foreign entities, and individuals are still not eligible for these types of grants. That is a requirement from the federal government, from the NEH. So I'm seeing a chat question that says, can we speak a little bit about cultural and community nonprofits with humanities focused missions, our performing arts and community organizations who also have educational programs or performance series which elaborate on ethnic history eligible? So the short answer is that most likely an organization that has a performance-based mission, including if that performance-based mission is from a particular ethnic or cultural group, would be eligible for a program support grant. The reason why I mentioned that, the reason why that decision is made is because we foundationally, there exists the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. The NEA is focused on arts-based funding. The NEH is focused on humanities-based funding. We are the state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So we're really focusing on that humanities component. However, as I said, there is real overlap between the arts and humanities. So the types of expenses we would not be able to fund through our grants would include things like if you were purchasing a lot of paint to do art classes, for example, if you were teaching how to actually, like dance a particular dance. These are expenses that are very much arts focused. Those are programs that are very much arts focused. However, if part of the work that you were doing, let's say in your dance program, let's say in your, because this has come up, let's say in your Indian dance program, right? The actual teaching of the dances themselves would not be something we would be likely to support. It might be in a program support grant, it might be a small portion would go toward that, but not the majority of funds. However, if part of this was also about learning about culture, discussing that culture's history, helping the community, hosting community dialogues about a particular culture, all of that fits very much well under much better under the humanities umbrella. That makes sense. Again, if you have a specific question, I do recommend that we take a little bit of 10 minutes of time outside of this project, outside of this presentation to talk it through a little bit. But I hope that's a little bit of help. Great. Excellent. I'm glad to hear from you, Rim Leroy. That's wonderful. Okay, continuing along for a moment. This was a nice introduction to this because we're going to talk about use of funds. So you have, depending on exactly when you receive your grant, you have actually a little more than a year to spend out your funds. This is also a change from last year, and we are very happy about it. So your grant period, as we call it, becomes the date of when you receive your award through December 31st, 2022. We are allowing you to back up your expenses a little bit through June. So any expenses that are incurred from June of 2021 through December 31st of 2022, that's the time period that you have to spend out your funding. Depending on exactly what kind of grant you have, this includes both operational and programmatic expenses. The widest variety of this come through the GOS awards, the General Operating Support Awards. But you can also think about the program support awards as being like general operating support for a particular program, for a smaller program. Okay. There are specific costs that are 100% ineligible, regardless of what kind of grants you have. There's not a lot of them, to be perfectly honest, which is nice. And the list is right within the guidelines, so you can see it. I strongly recommend that you read the use of funds guidance for each grant type to make sure that it makes sense to you. And this will also help you right size your grant. We strongly recommend that you ask for what you need. And if what you need is $20,000, then please ask for $20,000. But we did find with our CARES Act grants that some organizations asked actually for more than what they needed and had trouble spending down some of those funds, particularly related to very small volunteer-based organizations. They had some trouble spending down those funds in the time allotted. So really think about your expenses between now and the end of 2022 and what makes sense for you as far as how much you need. We are not able to give extensions on this grant. Whatever is not spent out by December 31st, 2022 will have to be returned to the council. And the worst part about that is then we would have to return it to the federal government, and it doesn't even go right back to NEH, it goes into the general fund and they can use it for anything. We don't want to do that. We want to spend our money on outstanding humanities programs here in New Jersey. Okay, so getting into a little more detail on this. For general operating support grants, we can basically, when you have a general operating support, this means your organization is humanities missioned, and we can basically support anything that your organization does. This includes staff salaries, administrative costs, programmatic expenses, absolutely. Everything from the people who run your programs to the room rental or the cost of your building, your rent, some of your electricity, things like that, your toilet paper, I mean, literally all of it. We can support anything related to the organization for general operating support funding, because all of the work you do is humanities related. Again, caveat, there are a few expenses that are absolutely not allowed. And you should definitely take a look at those. These funds can be used for not only for, as I said, immediate needs, but also longer term, strategic planning, capacity building, technology upgrades. I know that so many of us have been thinking about that. Technology upgrades may mean the actual physical thing that you need, but also things like training. Do you need expertise from somebody? How do you run a good Zoom meeting? I don't know. I'm getting a little bit better at it, I think, but it'd be great if I had some training on this. We can look at expansion or pivot to new activity types. Do you need to move things outdoors? Do you need new technology, et cetera? Do you need to do some equity assessment and planning? This has been a huge focus of a lot of work that we're seeing in New Jersey over the last several years, but times a million in the very recent past. So all of that fits under the types of things that you can do with your GOS funding through the COVID-19 response grant program. So use of funds for the program support. What you could think of is this is like general operating support for a particular program. So let's say you're a social service organization that runs one humanities program. Your full budget might be $1 million. Your humanities program might be $50,000. So you could think about it as that being your little mini thing that you're gonna apply for funding for, right? This $50,000. So again, any staff costs or operating costs that are associated with your humanities program. This can include contract or temporary labor. It can include full-time regular staff labor. It could include people who have not been paid in the past who you'd really like to pay now. Yes, absolutely. It can include planning and development of new programs. It can include reimagining of existing programs. It can include just keeping everything going as it's been going for a long time. Any type of programmatic expenses, technology needs, expansion of outdoor activities, virtual activities, efforts to increase access. And this can be, again, anything from like better marketing to a different place that you host your programs. Better signage, to help people know where they're going and what they have to do when they get there. Truly, there are very few restrictions on these types of expenses. But let's talk about some of the biggies. Any work outside of the humanities is not something that we support. This is also incredibly important. If you are applying for other federal grants, and that includes if you have a current NJCH grant. So if you have an incubation grant or an action grant that's still open, we cannot pay for the same overlapping costs. That is essentially double dipping. And again, if you have specific questions about this, this is a good thing for us to go over before you submit your application. To give an example, let's say you have applied for funding through a different federal grant to support your program director. I'm going to use program director because that's what I am. Your program director's salary from September through December. Great. You should not apply for funding from NJCH to support your program director's salary from September to November, or to December, excuse me. You might apply for funding to support a different person's salary from September to December, or to support that program director's salary from January through March, or as an example. We do not, if you are a collecting institution, we cannot apply for acquisitions. So if you want to buy this cool thing that's related to your stuff, you have to do it with funds other than New Jersey Council for the Humanities. You can't regrant your fund or give it out as a scholarship, a prize, or award. This is different. Travel is different. This particular fund cannot support travel from your organization at all. Sometimes in our previous grants, we supported travel, although there's some limitations around it. No travel expenses can be covered here. Purchase of land, large construction projects, renovation of buildings is a definite no. And anything related to lobbying, advocacy of a particular political action or bill, legislative support, again, this is not sort of generally advocating for like, hey, my institution is great, that's fine. That's not lobbying. We're talking about specifically lobbying, saying we want this person to support this bill. So again, if you have specific questions about lobbying, that is another one that is worth getting into in more detail. Once you have determined what you want to apply for, the application process is all contained in an application system we have called Foundant. You'll find a link to it through the guidelines. It incorporates the entire process from the LOI, which is the first step of the application, all the way through to the administration of your grant, all the way through to the final report. The first thing that you need to do is actually set up an account in that. If you already have an account, you're all set. The account setup process takes maybe 10 minutes or so. When you are ready to submit your LOI, you click right on that, right on the type of application you want, general operating support or program support, and that'll take you through. The LOI is very short, and I encourage you to not let this be something that becomes burdensome for you. This is primarily an eligibility check for us. We are going to verify that your organization is eligible to apply, meets all of our eligibility guidelines, is in good standing with the IRS, things like that. And then we're just a brief description of how you wish to use the funds will help us determine that you are indeed using these for a humanities related program. Once you submit your LOI, it takes us a day or two to review it, make sure you're good to go, and then we either approve or don't approve. Assuming you are approved to submit an application, you will receive an email that says, yay, submit an application, and your application will be there for you, ready to go in the system. If your LOI is not approved, we will give you a brief description of why it is not. We are happy to talk about that in more detail. Also, if you think we've made a mistake, please reapply or please call us and let us know. Sometimes it's just a misunderstanding on our end. Sometimes you may have, this happens, for example, with arts organizations where they might be focused, they just make a mistake and they focus on the arts portion of their work and not the humanities portion. That is easily remedied and we can reconsider your LOI. When your application comes through, we have 2 additional due dates coming up, September 1st and October 15th. Every application that has been submitted by September 1st will be reviewed after that, right after that deadline, and everyone that's been submitted by October 15th will be reviewed right after that deadline. Notifications should come about 3 weeks after each deadline. Might be slightly longer or slightly shorter. 3 weeks is a good guess. I mentioned this already, but our next 2 deadlines, September 1st and October 15th. Please note that when you submit the LOI, that's your first step. It does take us a couple days, up to a couple days, especially if you submit over a weekend or something like that, to review it and get back to you. So make sure you back it up a few days before the deadline. You can't submit an LOI on September 1st and also have your application in by the end of the day. You just can't, like, that's just not going to be possible for us. So make sure if you want to hit your application deadline on September 1st, back it up to maybe, I don't know, August 25th or so, and to give yourself enough time to hear back from us and submit your application. The very last day that you will be able to submit an LOI for any of this is October 8th. That's a week before the final deadline. So make sure at the very latest you get your application in by October 8th. Oh, actually, before I go to that, our funding is not, while we have multiple deadlines, the funding is not rolling. We are reserving funds for each round. So no matter what, you don't have to feel like I have to submit right now or else they might run out of funding before we hit that October 15th deadline. That definitely will not happen. So apply when it makes the most sense for you to apply, when you can do that. If you do not receive a grant when you do apply, you are welcome to reapply, assuming there is one more deadline. So if you submit in September, you find out you don't get a grant that time, you could amend your application and reapply at the October 15th deadline. Whether or not you choose to reapply, any organization that did not receive a grant on their first application will be reconsidered at the end. We're going to go through everybody at the end of the application. We're going to go through everybody who didn't receive a grant, especially if we have additional funding left over, try to get some more grants out there, even if they are partial awards.
We do have a question in the chat about marketing and advertising and whether
Yes.
That falls under program support or I think general operating support funds.
Yeah, absolutely. Both. Any type of marketing expenses would be eligible for either type of grant. Absolutely. I should mention also, I want to just leave this up for a moment, that as I mentioned, the two main people who are working on our grants program are me and my colleague, James Kirkland, who's a program officer. You can reach both of us if you email grants@njhumanities.org rather than, G Naglak at NJ Humanities or J Kirkland at NJ Humanities. So that's usually the fastest way to get in touch with us. We also answer our phones, of course, as quickly as we possibly can, but often sending out an email and then seeing if setting up a time to talk can be a little faster than other opportunities. For our program, our project grants, our action grants and incubation grants, we do draft review, we do consultations. The type of grants that we have here and the sheer number of applicants do not allow us to do that. But if you have specific questions, we're always happy to answer them. It's no problem whatsoever. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see all your lovely faces and open up additional questions. You can feel free to put questions into the chat and we'll get to them. Or you can unmute yourself and ask a question if that is easier for you or preferable.
Hi, Gigi. I'm Rachel.
How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Hair's up though.
Yeah.
I just curious, for the PS grants,
Yeah.
if you wanted to organize a symposium and invite lecturers from a particular field, ancient studies, medieval studies, and have them come and give a talk virtually, does that count?
Yes. Your programs can be virtual or in person or a combination of both or neither. No, I don't know.
Hybrid?
Surely there's some way to do it neither.
Hybrid.
Yes, absolutely. Virtual or in-person programs. The one restriction that we have is that our funding has to follow any local, state, or national restrictions that exist in in-person gatherings. So if this is not the case right now, but if New Jersey state government says, no gatherings of above 150 people, and you have a program with 200 people, we will take away your funding. Yes.
Thank you very, very much.
Absolutely, no problem.
I have a question.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, I'm Rimli. Thank you for answering my questions before. I was just, so we have several performance series. One of them in particular is based on an ancient Indian epic, and we have made it into a musical in English. And I just wanted to know, of course, I know that probably I have many more questions and it may not be answered here. I can reach out to you separately. Sure. But for example, like one of our productions is the musical I was mentioning, and that is actually educating people on an ancient text from India. And it's based on the Ramayana, and we've used artists from around the world to present it, and we've performed it. And in fact, we've been invited to perform it in India too, with artists from India as well as from the US. And cool. But because of the pandemic, it's all in limbo right now. But I just wanted to know if something like this would be eligible. And then we also have another production which is actually talking about the festivals of India, the ancient festivals and how it's celebrated today, the relevance. It's extremely educational and talking about the history of each of these festivals. And then we have another production which is called Glimpses of India. I think all of them have got a huge educational value in the arts and humanities. Yeah. But I wanted to know which part of these projects would be eligible, like would artist fees and things like that be eligible?
Yeah, so this is where it gets a little tricky. And it's hard for me to sort of give a blanket statement about this, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try my best. So
That's
I think that you're right, that there's both a humanities component and an arts component to this. And actually, that's a great example of a program that really enmeshes the two of them together in a beautiful way. And we see the opportunity that the arts have to encourage dialogue and learning and lifelong learning, you know, all of those kinds of things. So I would say one of the things to think about is, one, how are you just explaining this program in your application? So I think that really being very clear to our evaluators about the cultural value that this has, who your intended audiences are, and really a lot about the value of those programs as a tool for learning, I think is really critical. Two, when you're looking at the overall program costs, right? What aspects of the program are most humanities based and what aspects are not? So, you know, if you're talking about a performance, you have the expenses that go to all of that really incredible content that you're talking about, right? The artists who are developing it, I don't know, again, not knowing specifically, but there may be historians or, you know, literature people who are helping, right? There are people who are writing content to help people understand that kind of, why is this meaningful? Why do we care? What is the historical context around these pieces, et cetera? All of that stuff would be much more in line with the humanities than, say, the person who's running the lighting in a space. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah, so that's not to say that we would, you know, if there was a small portion of your program that included, you know, artistic expenses, yes, we have covered them in the past. We're not quite that we're not quite that mean, but keeping the focus on the humanities content is critical.
Yeah. Okay, so the developing of the program, the concept, you know, the thought, and all of the educational value that this has.
That's really, that's the meat, that's our meat and potatoes, so to speak.
And what
I say
about,
as
like,
a vegetarian.
what about like, say, things like, say, you know, space rent, like renting a theater space, those would be eligible, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a really good example of very eligible expenses for everything. Having a space to do it and the stuff that you need, that has a lot. In all of our grants, that's a big thing. And the people to do it.
And that would be part of program support too. It would be, okay, all right.
Correct.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
On all sense. Okay, I see we have a bunch of questions and a couple.
Yeah,
people
we've got a
raising
lot
hands.
going on in the chat, and so I just want to
triage me, Angel.
Yes. So Rania had a couple questions. They joined us a little bit later on in this presentation and wanted to ask about which of the funding if the funding can go towards payroll expenses. You did cover this briefly, so can you clarify just between the program support grants and general operating support, which funds can be used towards payroll costs? And
Definitely.
also Rania wants to know if the recording of this will be made available after this presentation is over.
Yes, so we already actually have a recording of our last program up on the website. I'm not sure if we're going to keep that one or replace this one, but we're definitely there will always be one up, and they have basically the same content. And we also send this out to everybody who has registered. So that's another thing we could do. Staff expenses, yes. The short answer is yes. Both general operating support and program supports grants can support staff expenses. General operating support can really support just about any staff expenses. Program support grants can go to staff expenses that are directly related to that program. So again, using an example of an arts organization, anybody who's actually working on the program, the humanities focused program that you're working on, cool. Anybody who is not, no. Does that make sense? Okay, cool.
Next question.
Sorry, go ahead, Angel. What was that?
Go ahead. Yeah, next question is from Dr. Prakash. I hope I'm saying it correctly. Forgive me if I'm not. And the question is, will a nonprofit public health organization like the New Jersey Public Health Association be eligible for project support grants?
Again, it depends on what type of, so yeah, eligible, yes, should be eligible, as long as the program that you're applying for is humanities based. So again, would it a vaccination clinic? No. An opportunity to meet with people and help them to understand why vaccination is important? Possibly, yes. Does that make sense?
Hey, sorry, my video is not on. I'm Dr. Prakash. So yes, so it makes perfect sense. What we are doing, it's not a vaccination clinic, but there are different people. It's a collaboration between the New Jersey Public Health Association and the members, where we are actually educating, communicating with the minority population through focus groups, like have people in certain areas, educate them, communicate with them, and understand their cultural values or what the thoughts behind vaccine hesitancy, rather. That's where we are focusing on. So we just wanted to see, like, can we support them for the place we bring them together and engage them in that kind of conversation. We have community public health workers associated with it. So will the grant support those kind of initiatives, was my question.
Yes, and particularly the humanities components of that. So if you're talking about the, like what are the humanities needs that you have? Are there experts that you're bringing in who are, cultural studies experts, for example? Are there that kind of thing? So the short answer is yes. That it sounds to me, based on what you've told me so far, that would definitely be eligible.
Thank you.
Sure.
Katie's hand was raised first, and then Samantha.
Great, Katie.
Hi, so my question is about, I had initially, my project is, I'm at Rowan University, and we are, have been acquiring the archives of the Miss America Foundation, and
how interesting, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, well, we just sort of been handed it, and it requires a lot of work to, sort of figure out what we have and then sort of make it available to the public for, research and New Jersey history, we'd initially been planning to apply for one of the incubation grants, but those are not happening this year because of these grants. So my question is, to what extent does this have to be a COVID specific project? Because obviously, in the circumstances, this would be, it's a digitization project.
Sure.
And, so it'll all be, and moving forward, the world is going to be increasingly, accessible online anyway, but I'm wondering to what extent do we have to sort of make it, a COVID project that kind of wasn't before?
It does not have to be a COVID project.
Okay.
Other than the fact that it's happening in the COVID times. Like these projects do not at all have to be about COVID, other than the fact that everything we do is about COVID these days.
Right, yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And yes, archival projects, digitization projects, they are eligible. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Samantha.
And Samantha.
Thank you. Hi, Gigi.
Hey.
So Samantha, I'm a faculty member over at the County College of Morris, and my team is the Parks Program Project Yellowstone.
Yep.
So we've received funding from your organization in the past, and we're planning to apply again for this upcoming cycle. So with this, our group likes to rotate with the grants that we may be involved in, with the rotating of the grant director to kind of spread the wealth a little bit, who does work,
Totally.
more work than each other. So I was wondering if it would hurt us in this process if the grant director did not have a direct background that was rooted in the humanities.
Would it hurt you? So I would love to say no.
Okay.
I would say that it's not critically important that that the grant director is not represented. I think it's very important. It would be very important for you to then explain how this is rooted in the humanities and who is working on it in the humanities. So one of the things that I know generally from programs that are evaluators, and all of our grants are peer reviewed, by the way. I should mention that it is humanities professionals in New Jersey that review our grants from all kinds of backgrounds, both academic and public humanities. So One of the things that I have seen trip up organizations that grant directors, or I'm sorry, that grant evaluators will notice is like, hey, none of their grant is going to any humanities people. Why is that? So my advice to you always, there may be a very good reason. There may be a very, very good reason. Make sure you explain it, because that very good reason becomes, oh, I see, their humanities consultant has donated all of his or her time. Fine, no problem, now I understand. So that's the sort of thing you want to make sure to do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Seeing a bunch more questions and comments, yeah.
I see Britt's question next, which is, are organizations restricted to only sending in one program support grant application? If they're at a large university and there are other colleagues doing separate humanities programming, can only one group from that university apply?
No, not only one can apply. So in a large institution, including educational institutions and governmental institutions, one application per department / agency / institute / whatever. But for example, I'll use Rowan University since it just came up. Thank you, Katie. The history department at Rowan can apply, and so can the English department. At the city of Jersey City, the Office of Arts and Culture can apply, and so can the mayor's office, for example.
Eileen asks if diversity, equity, and inclusion rooted projects can be included in the program support grants application.
100%, absolutely, strongly advocate. Particularly, we're very interested, I've started doing some research around this and we've started seeing applications like this, particularly DEAI initiatives that focus on the humanities. For example, we gave a program grant, or a project grant, excuse me, I think it was, I'm trying to remember if it was yes, it was an incubation grant to an organization in North Jersey called Social Justice Matters, which was hosting a series of community meetings where they used art, literature, and history to explore race relations in their town throughout the last 50 years. So that was a DEI initiative, obviously, but was very clearly rooted in the humanities, using art, poetry, and historical texts. It was very cool, by the way. I saw that Angel already put in grants at njhumanities.org. Come to me and James, and are usually your fastest way to get in touch with us if you have specific questions. So you can also reach each of us at our individual addresses as well. They're on our website, and I can tell you it's first initial, last name at njhumanities.org. Any other questions, comments? Yeah. Everybody doing okay? Good, 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 good. Oh, thank you, Angel, for putting our...
I was actually typing out a question, but then
Go ahead.
I have a last question.
Cool. Oh, sure.
I'm sorry, I just typed it out and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna speak. So, so should we just single out one particular program for the program support? Or is it possible for us to mention that these are the programs or these are the performances we have and they could cover any of these? Is it better to do that?
That is a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. I should have mentioned it actually in my presentation. For a program support grant, you can do either, and whatever is going to make the most sense for your organization. Some organizations, in theory, your program support grant can support any type of humanities work that your organization is doing. And that may mean it makes sense to focus in on one very specific project, or it may mean you're looking at a bunch of different projects. Hey, we're an organization that runs literature groups, and we have a history project, and we have this, and we'll put it all together in a little bit of, and we'll do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's fine, absolutely fine. Or you may say, no, we have, as Britt was just talking, we have an archival project. We're focusing on this little part of it. Yes, we do other humanities-based things, but we're going to really focus in on this. Part of it is going to also depend on, how much funding you need to do different parts of it. Some of your programs may be very low cost, and that's great. Chuck them in there, absolutely, if they fit. Whatever makes sense for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. We are, I want to be very cognizant of time. It is about 12 o'clock, so I completely understand. We are officially, I think I'm going to officially wrap up. Oh, no, there's one more question I just saw. We have a number in mind of how many programs we will support. We have about, I'm sorry, I forget the exact number. We have about $950,000 to spend on this. So we will spend about $950,000, probably a little bit more, because I'm sure we'll take some additional funding that we have and throw it toward this program as well. We don't have a specific number of programs that we are intending to support, in part because, you know, $950,000 can support, you know, X number of $20,000 grants and Y number of $10,000 grants. So it's really going to depend on how many applications we have. And it's hard to say exactly what the numbers are. We've roughed it out to about $300,000 per deadline. It'll be between $300,000 and $350,000. So that's sort of where we're at. I can tell you, because we just passed our July 15th deadline, that we got about 40 applications in that grant, and they are being evaluated and awarded as we speak. So we will be making an announcement about that, and you can see a little bit more about it very shortly, as soon as our Director of Communications is back.
Thank you.
I am going to stop recording right now, and